pneumonia. In today's Then and Now, the tax man cometh for millions of Americans this week. And here's a report from NBC Nightly News on how much President Ronald Reagan paid back in 1983.
The Internal Revenue Service waits for no man very long, including the President of the United States. Mr. Reagan wrote his big check to the IRS yesterday, and the White House made his returns public this afternoon. Chris Wallace has them.
1982 was a good year for the Reagans. According to their return, their total taxable income was $741,000. That includes $200,000 for being president, $247,000 in interest income, most from a blind trust, and $257,000 in capital gains, most from the sale of the Reagan home in Los Angeles for the previously undisclosed figure of $1 million. But there was also bad news. The Reagans had to pay more than $292,000 in taxes, including a check they wrote yesterday for $124,000.
All right, so now compare those numbers with 29 years later, the current president's tax forms. We found out this weekend that President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama reported a joint adjusted gross income of $789,000 last year. They paid $162,000 in federal taxes. Their tax rate is about 20.5%. The income keeps the Obamas in the top 1% of taxpayers. So with Income Tax Day on Tuesday, if you're stressing over your tax forms or trying to find an accountant on a Sunday, maybe you've been confused by all the talk about higher taxes and the so-called Buffett rule. President Obama has been speaking out in support of his proposal to raise taxes on the richest Americans, as suggested by billionaire Warren Buffett, who said he paid a lower tax rate than his secretary. Now, it may become a big issue this election year, but there are a lot of questions about the idea. So it's a perfect topic for fact or fiction. And joining me today from Washington to answer some of these questions, David Hawkings, editor of the Daily Briefing on Roll Call. David, great to see you, and we're going to get to this as we all sweat it out over tax day coming. All right, President Obama's Buffett law proposal would make millionaires pay a 30% federal tax rate. Fact or fiction?
That's a fact. As millionaire is defined by how much you make every year, actually it would kick in for people making $1 million a year or more, and that full 30% rate would apply to people making $2 million a year or more. But that's the basics of the Buffett rule.
All right, so we're off to number one with a fact there. Next, most American millionaires do not pay as high a tax rate as other Americans. Fact or fiction?
That's a fiction. They actually do pay as much. Most of them do. Most middle-income people pay somewhere between 15 and 20% effective tax rate. Effective tax rate means after you've filled out all your forms, taken all your deductions and your benefits, the effective tax rate, the grand total you made versus what percentage you pay. Most middle-income people are in that 15 to 20% range. The president, as you just mentioned, is at 20.1%. Mitt Romney at about 15%. Most rich people, though, aren't like Mitt Romney, because most rich people don't make most of their income in capital gains, investment profits. They pay closer to 30%.
All right, so David, people want to talk about solutions with our tax money, the revenue that's being made. So let's move on to the effect of the proposal, taxing millionaires. The question is, would it pay for the big cuts in the federal deficit? Fact or fiction?
That is a fiction. It would not. Actually, what the president is proposing wouldn't raise all that much money relative to the size of the budget. It sounds like a lot. If we leave the current tax law alone this year in Congress, it would raise about $5 billion a year only. If the Bush tax cuts are repealed, it would go up to about $16 billion a year, this Buffett rule. Those are large amounts of money, to be sure, but not anything close to the amount of our deficit, which is still approaching about $1 trillion a year.
All right, so David, when they talk about the Buffett rule, does it have the support of most Americans? Fact or fiction?
Yes, that's a fact. It does. Gallup actually had a poll out on Friday that showed 60% of Americans like this idea. Another recent poll showed that almost as many people would favor applying this to people down at the $250,000 or above level. And believe it or not, that Gallup poll showed almost half of Republicans, about 45% of Republicans favored this idea.
All right, so the last question, is it expected to pass Congress? Fact or fiction?
No way. It's not going to happen. The big vote is tomorrow in the Senate. As many viewers will know, basic civics these days, it takes 60 votes to do anything in the Senate. The Democrats have about 53 votes at their disposal, so it's going to fall well short tomorrow night.
David Hawkings. David, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.
At the top of the hour, live reports on